welcome back, everybody. I know it feels like boy, these weeks and months fly by. It was nice to see so many people in Chicago and so many friends and familiar faces. So always great to see everybody. This topic we've kind of discussed before a little bit, but I tried to switch it around and kind of increase some of the information on it and the importance of why I think it's actually probably one of the more important topics today. So first off, whenever we're talking about surface texture, I think the proper word is topography. And surface topography is really one of the essence or one of the things that I think really bring your work to another level. And during the hour that we have together, the time we have together now, I'm going to highlight some of the pros and cons of it, right? And I think some of the challenges are, I get it, we're in a very digital world, and I always try so hard to not sound negative on digital because I'm not. Again, I say the same things over and over again, right? We're a six-person lab. I have three mills, three scans, three printers. We have all the technology, and we use it all every day. They're running constantly. But there are things that get lost along the way. And one of them that I'll kind of show you as we go on today is going to be some of these fine details that we really look at. So for one, surface topography. The surface topography refers to both the profile of the shape of the tooth, the roughness, including some of the little waviness and bumps and ridges that you see. And probably more importantly, it's kind of what really ties one tooth to another more than we give it credit for. Meaning that if I look at the tooth all the way to the left of your screen now, you guys can kind of see that one. And you can say, you know what shade is it, right? It's grayed out, so you can't even see a shade. But the point I'm making is, does the shade matter at this point? Because what really matters is all the details that you see here are going to make this work. And I also get it that when we're doing larger cases, some of us feel that this is not as critical, and I would argue it's just as critical. So if you're matching a single central, you're doing 2, 4, 6, 8, or 10 units, we're still trying to fit the light reflectiveness, the age, and truly the topography that that person should and shouldn't have. That's kind of really important. So I think what's really, for me, especially in single central world, is that we already start to see some of the areas that are concerning for us. We have a very small preparation here. And what I'd like you to notice on this tooth, it's an old tooth, I don't think it's one of my greatest matches, but here's what I kind of wanted to point out. What makes this work or not work? And the things that really make this work more is one, look at the mesial line angle on the tooth number 8 or the 1-1, and look at that light, that kind of beam of light that comes right up that mesial line angle. And look at my restoration to the left, to the right of your screen, and you should notice on my mesial line angle, the number 9 or the 2-1, it's pretty close. Now, I would argue it's not perfect. My line angle should be a little sharper there. It should definitely have a little more reflective light, but it's that little kind of tweak that helps it to harmonize and blend in with the adjacent tooth. Also take a look at this area here. Look at the area of the natural tooth that not only has surface topography, but also has some light reflectance, even from the angle that we're taking the photo. And it's my job to match that. Did I match it perfect? No, definitely not. Looking back on this case from, oh God, 10 years ago, I look at it and I'm like, oh, I could have did a little better on this, a little better on that. But the point of it is does it work? And the reason it kind of works and blends in, this is not cemented yet, is really because of those two things that we just talked about. The ability to have the optical light reflectance, and again, my mesial line angle could be way better, and the flatness and the little surface topography in the middle third of the teeth. And those are the things that really help to make teeth harmonize at the end for us to evaluate what we like and don't like. And by the way, it's just as important on the maxillary arch as it is on the mandible arch. Right? I think it's like, I almost feel like we treat mandible teeth like they're not as critical or not as important. And in some cases, they're more important, as probably most of you know. As patients age, they tend to show a lot less of their maxillary incisal edge and a lot more of the lower, the mandibular incisal edge. Now, this patient's fairly young, but even in a normal smile for her, look at how much lower tooth she shows. Actually, a lot more lower tooth than she shows on the upper. So for us to make this blend in, it's really important that we get the right blend there to make those work. And the blend isn't going to be just about the color. The color is critical. You see my polarized photograph here, and you see the polarized photograph sends me pretty close. I mean, there were definitely some little tweaks here and there that I could make, but really what's going to make it blend is what we talked about before. Look at the light. Look at the light reflection. See the distal line angle on the adjacent tooth, or the distal angle on mine could have been a little longer. Look at the mesial reflection on the adjacent tooth. Look at the mesial reflection on mine, could have been a little shorter, right? So I'm looking at these things, trying to figure out how do I make that improvement? How do I get those little details to really help them blend in with what we're doing? And a lot of times with these cases, it's much more about the surface than we give it credit for. Look at this particular case right here. This is patient. You're seeing the 1-1 and the 1-2, or the 7 and 8, and then you notice that not only is there a lot of modeling on the surface of this tooth, but there's also a lot of surface texture. It's kind of a weirder surface texture in the sense that not a lot of rhyme or rhythm to it, right? It's kind of just a little ups and downs and bumps and ridges. And when we start to look at that from a light perspective, where you start to look at that from how the light affects it, what I'm really looking to make happen is get a similarity in how the light reflection works. And then obviously is the color and everything else. So this particular case was interesting, and I won't bore you with the whole history of this case. It's a really old case, but what's interesting is the doctor had sent me this case originally asking me to make one central. I think it was this number 9 he wanted me to make. And I was kind of like, you're kidding me, right? I'm not going to match that to what I consider a pretty bad restoration on the number 8. And he said to me, well, the patient only wants to pay for one. And, again, long story, I'll kind of avoid it. The bottom line was just, if you want to do it, I'm going to charge you for 2. So why don't you just do both of them now and make it easier so I could really try to make them blend and match. And coincidentally enough, when he threw it at the patient was like, oh my God, I always hated these veneers. I'd be great if we could kind of do them both. So it worked out better in the end. I made 2 refractory veneers. You can see they're paper thin. You can see my yellow dye spacer coming through, and you can see all the surface and topography and white calcifications that I tried to blend in there. And then we'll place them intraoral, and you can see that that papilla didn't really fill in yet, but it started to fill in pretty quickly within the next 15, 20 minutes. So that was just managing the basic biology. But why does it work? What really works about these? I mean, there's almost, I'm going to say almost no color to them, right? Because look at what I have here. I have a paper thin window veneer in essence, right? You can see that the entire veneer is pretty much translucent. And how do you know that? Because you see yellow dye spacer behind it. The entire tooth looks yellow. So I'm not really getting color from my restoration. I'm really getting my blend from the restoration more in how it harmonizes with the adjacent teeth. It's more about getting that same light reflection, the same topography, and same little details. And I softened up a little bit on the white calcification to try to make them stand out a little bit more. But if you look at it in black and white, I think you can kind of see what I mean. What really makes this flow and makes this work for a case that's got to be at least 15 years old is really the time that was spent here. And I always get a kick out of this because I took a course a long, long time ago, and I probably told this story, but I'll just give you a quick version of it. One of my first ceramic courses I took probably 20 years ago was with Aki Yoshida. And Aki, who's a friend of mine today and a great, amazing, amazing ceramist. Somebody raised their hand in the course and said, how long does it take for you to make a single central? And Aki looked at him and kind of laughed and said, well, it takes me about 25 minutes to build it up and about 3 days to get the texture right. And I thought that was such a valuable statement because he's 100% right. Ask me what it takes me to build the crown today. If I use 6 powders or 90 powders, I'm going to tell you it's 18 to 26 minutes per tooth. But where I need to spend more time is under a scope, looking at these little surface details to really make that work. And that's where I think that fine art process comes in, right? Especially when we're not really working with color, because in this case, I wasn't. I was really just making a window veneer, which is almost translucent at that point. So some of you have played this game before with me. I think I just showed this in Chicago with a few friends around. So let's play it one more time because I'm going to take a different angle on it this time. In front of you, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teeth. And out of those 6 teeth, the first question I used to ask with this is, if I needed to make this tooth, what material should I use? Should it be lithium disilicate, zirconia, PFM, veneer? And obviously, we don't know what's underneath it. But when you see that, do you see a material that you think can work in this area? And what about this one? What material would work with that tooth? What material works with this tooth? What material works with that? And what with that? And what with that? And at the other end of this, what I would ask everybody is which one of these are real and which one of them are fake? Now, there's one that stands out as obviously fake, and I always defend myself with the one that stands out as obviously fake because I was matching another crown when I made it. So I think if you guys all guess that this is the fake one here, yes, I was matching another restoration that I don't think I made that I was trying to match it to, and it does stand out as kind of fake looking. But let's take a different angulation on this, and let's look at it from a surface texture point of view. And look at how different each of these are. Look at the surface of this tooth. Is this a younger tooth or an older tooth? Look at how much translucency kicks in. Look at the rough mesial and distal line angles that kind of create. Look at those little bumps and ridges that actually kind of create what I would say is these real little areas of concern for us to be able to work our way through. You see all these little bumps and ridges in there as compared to the adjacent tooth where it's a lot more dominant, right? The surface texture is a lot more dominant. The convexities and concavities there's a lot more going on there. And I would argue this is actually an easier tooth to make. And the reason it's easier is because there's so much happening that it makes life a little bit easier for me to match it. Where this, extremely difficult because there's such a fine amount of little surface topography that to make a single central here, I would struggle a lot more. How about the third tooth over? Let me blow this one up a little bit. Again, some surface topography, more of convexities and concavities and little details. The fourth one over is probably what I would say is the easiest one, even though that probably looks to be the most complicated. But the reason it's the easiest is because there's no crazy rhyme or reason for what's happening except for the growth and development of the tooth. And really what's important to us is that we put as much ins and outs, as much ridges, as much highlights and accents as is there. Do they all have to be exactly the same? No. They just have to blend and reflect light similar. Okay, the obvious fake one that you guys picked out. And then the last one here, again, much harder to match a case like this because of maybe the age of the tooth and the softness of some of those, some of the topography on the surface. So the question I asked, and I've asked this before, is which ones are real and which ones are fake? For those of you who played the game already, natural, natural, fake, natural, obviously fake, and obviously fake, or should be obviously fake to some of you. But the point of that is what material and how do I match that topography? And again, some of them are difficult. This one is way more difficult for me to make work because of a few reasons. One, I don't know if you guys realize, but not only is the topography kind of subtle, it's a very smooth, very small amount of ridges, but more importantly, look at the shine on the tooth, or the luster as we call it. And if you notice the luster on that case, it's actually what I would call a very low luster. And that might be one of the most complicated cases to do if we had to match that tooth. You already know that I did because I'm telling you it's fake, right? So why is that one so complicated? It's so complicated because not only is it difficult to get those fine little details, but it's also difficult to get them and keep the luster very low. And I'll kind of go through that a little bit as we go through our time together. So let's start with this one. This is a case that I've showed a bunch of times over the years. This was actually a window veneer, a non-prep window veneer for my friend Dane. And I'm thinking Dane and Dr. Bernadette Sav are going to be the two guest hosts that host with me. One of them is going to be April 30th. I think Bernadette's going to do that one, hopefully. And then I'm going to have Dane come in for another one. So I'll have at least two guest hosts with me for some of the upcoming webinars, which is going to be really fun. Anyway, on this case, what's interesting about the case for me is it was a no prep window veneer, so not a lot of space to work in. And again, just like that first one I just showed you, I got to make the surface work. That's really what I have to make work, because in the end, I have very little space to actually work in to make that look like a tooth. So it was a refractory veneer. I probably only used 2 or 3 powders because I didn't have a lot of space to work in. I finalized the case and finished it, and it worked out pretty well. What you guys should notice, and I've pointed this out on several occasions before, is although it blends and it harmonizes and it looks well, and I think it might have been an ACD case for him or something that he passed with, but I'm going to tell you it wasn't correct. There's a lot of little things that I missed here. Not a lot. There's two major things that I missed here. One, obviously the space was kind of large and I had a large tooth underneath it, so I didn't really have the ability to open that embrasure, although contralaterally it wasn't very open either. We got the colorations right and some of the topography. And I don't really show you this one, but let's look at the surface here on the central, and let's look at the surface on this cuspid. What you should notice is I'm kind of in the middle. I don't know if I have as much surface as I see here on this central, and maybe I have a little bit too much compared to the lateral, right? So I'm kind of in the middle of the two of them. And actually, I'd say that's acceptable. Where it's not acceptable to me, and again, light reflection, notice the line angle on the cuspid, line angle on my lateral. You can see the line angle on the mesial of the number 9, so that kind of just the angle of the camera. Where is the failure here? The failure here is in the surface luster. I actually over polished this a little bit, and I think I over polished it trying to draw from memory, because I think I had a little too much surface topography and I wanted to kind of polish a little bit out. So as I was kind of working through my polish, notice the luster of the restoration here compared to the luster of the tooth here. Now look, I'm being super picky, right? Is that a big deal? And when you see it in the mouth with saliva and the patient smiles, it's a home run. Everything is fine. But from a learning perspective, these are the little details that I want to kind of harness in, because we want to learn to make it harmonize the right way, not just because people see it from, the cocktail distance, standing 3-4 people, 3-4 feet away from people. We want to make it harmonize when I can blow it up on a screen, and I show these cases sometimes on 20, 30-foot screens, right? So that's a lot of times where I catch my mistakes. Sometimes here in the office, I look at it in my hand, I take a picture, I put it on my desk screen, and I'm like, yeah, I think everything looks pretty good. I'm sending this out. And then, a month later, I'm lecturing in front of a group, and I turn around to the 30-foot screen and I see it, and I'm like, oh no, what did I do? I did too much of this or too little of that, right? So it's really easy to kind of define these things when you're looking at it later on with the photography. And I've showed this case so many times, another single central case that was a little challenging. I'll show it today from a little different perspective. I've showed this case as a micro buildup over the last few years. This was, I think, one of the first Lumax cases, if I'm not mistaken, or the second or third, but somewhere in the early stages. And what was interesting about it was obviously very little space to work in, so it was a micro layer. I only used 3 or 4 powders, and again, I showed this, so I'm not going to go into those details. But what matters for me at the end is the light and the surface topography and how they work together. And again, looking at it from this perspective, you should be able, this is not even cemented at this point, I'm just trying it in the patient's mouth, but you should see that it kind of harmonizes very nicely, right? It just flows with everything else. Look at let me blow this up. Look at the 2 little line angles of light right up those mesial lines, and how important those are to make that work. And when I come over here to the larger version of the screen, again, is my topography exactly the same? The answer is no. It's just similar in nature. And because it's similar, you see similar things. You see the highlight of the light reflection here, the highlight of the long axis of the line angle here. And what do you notice on the restoration? Same thing, the highlight of the long axis and that distal middle third line angle that kind of highlights the tooth. And yet the surface is not 100% the same. It's just very similar. And that's really what's going to make things blend and harmonize more times than not, those little details that really make them flow. Is the color perfect? If I photograph this under polarized, you should see that I'm not perfect. I'm close, right? I'd say there's maybe a hair too low in value and maybe a touch too much chroma on the cervical. The value in the middle third is pretty good, and I think that's kind of what makes it a home run. Could I be a hair brighter? Yeah, I'm sure if I put it under my OptiShade or one of my devices, I could check. I'm sure I'm off by a few points, but not really noticeable unless we're analyzing it in that way. And the incisal third is really the fun part, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to have some similarities to it, and we did that. So the point I'm making is color value is not perfect. It's just close. What makes it seem to work is really the ability for it to harmonize. And that's all the little details that we just talked about. And this is why I think we need to spend a lot more time with the surface topography and all the little detail things that make that work. So when we're looking at surface topography, you have to remember there's no such thing as all the same. It's kind of the old, it's a snowflake, right? There's no two snowflakes that are exactly the same. Is that like 100% true? I should kind of Google that and find out. But I think that's a saying that we've said forever, right? There are no two snowflakes exactly the same. Well, there are no two teeth exactly the same. They have similar nuances, similar concepts as far as translucencies and developmental grooves and depth of color and translucency. But in the end, no topography is exactly the same as the one next to it or the case you did before. And in our repertoire, we need to kind of work on that to start to understand how to develop that. So I stole this from my friend Aki. I want to make sure he gets the credit for this. This was an article he did, I think, in QDT, oh, probably 10, 15 years ago. And I think it was one of the best ones for me to really understand it. And what he did was he broke the surface textures down into a few components. And then he also went through the lusters of the cases and then actually made a chart at the end to define them. And I still think this is 15 years later, the best version. So I've never tried to reproduce it. I usually do that because I want to make my own version. No need to. His is perfect. So look at the details here. First off, look at the stone model that you're looking at. And on this stone model, you can see lots of surface texture, lots of convexities, some concavities, right? Some things that kind of make this work. And when I look at teeth in nature, look at all those details that really flow in there and make that work. So what Aki did back in the day, and I still teach with it, is kind of go through all the different spectrums that we would be able to look at. And like I said to you before with one of the essentials that I showed you, that one that was all the way to the right of the screen, that one was probably the most difficult one for me to make. Why? Same reason that Aki is using this as an example. What he's trying to show here is that even though these two teeth are slightly different colors, to really make one of these teeth blend, if I wanted to make the number 9 or the 2-1, this would be one of the most difficult teeth to make. And the reason it would be is because look at the surface of the tooth. There is almost nothing on it. There's almost really no surface topography. It's almost a smooth piece of glass. And to make it worse, it's a very low luster piece of glass, right? It's really kind of low in value, and you see a lot of light transmission into the tooth, but you also see no surface. So if I had to make this tooth, I'm going to tell you it's a nightmare. Some of you at the end are probably going to ask me this question, so I'm going to jump into it now and just say that if I was making this tooth, how would I get that surface? I could tell you that I would get that surface by finishing with a very transparent material, a CLO or window material, depending on what kit you use, right? So window is one of the clearer kits in the VM9, but other kits have, they call it windows or super clear. Or I would actually take one of those materials and I would actually put a very low fusing, maybe a glaze paste into it or something that's going to make it over fire, but then I would fire it on a lower temperature. So what am I really trying to do? I'm trying to trick the ceramic to not get over baked, at the same time have a very smooth surface for me to kind of play with and polish and shine and control that in the final polishing of the restoration. If I overfire it and it's super shiny, no good. If I underfire it and I don't have enough penetration of the material, it's no good. So very specifically with these kinds of cases, very difficult to manage that low luster and low amount of surface texture. Whereas the adjacent two teeth, look at these two teeth. Piece of cake. This is easy to work on. Why is it easy? Because look at all the topography on these teeth. I have to look over to the side. Sorry, my screen's not centered for me here. Look at this topography on these two teeth. Would you say they're exactly the same? I mean, really take a good look. Let me blow it up for you guys. Are those the same? I mean, they're really not even close to being the same, right? Except for the fact there's a lot on both teeth. There's a lot of things happening there. And those lot of things make it easier for us. We don't have to make it perfect. We just have to make that bunch of light want to gather in the center of the tooth and put a lot of bumps and ridges and little index cuts in there to kind of make this flow a little bit. So much easier to make that one work. So here's how Aki broke it down, and I think this is a real simple way to do it. And again, he deserves the credit for it since he wrote this so many years ago. For one, again, if I had to make centrals, I'd rather make this one or that one as compared to these two. These are nightmares, and remember, when you see these, you're going to struggle with them to get everything right. So here's the way to look at it. Three kind of key points. One, vertical ridges or grooves. These are the convexities and the concavities, right? When you have these grooves that either highlight the long axis of the tooth or the marginal ridges of the tooth, you have to remember, in order for that to really stand out, you need concavity. So you can't have one without the other. You can't just make a ridge and have it flat across the tooth and think the ridge is going to pop out. In order to have it, it's like a contrasting color. White looks a lot brighter if you put it next to black. Blue looks a lot bluer if I put it next to a contradicting color, like maybe a yellow or a pink, right? Things that kind of make things stand out to us. Well, it's the same with the surface topography. If I want that ridge to stand out, it's not always about adding the ridge. Sometimes it's about taking away what's next to it. The second part will be the horizontal ridges and grooves. And these fall into play in most teeth. Some of it is the pericomato, which we'll talk about next, but some of it is just the developmental ridges. So we're getting these up and down kind of ridges and grooves, and we're getting these horizontal kind of ridges and grooves. How much of them you see depends on a lot. It depends on the developmental stages of the tooth, how hard it pushed through that tissue, and was the tissue a thin tissue, a bio 1 or a bio 2, or was it a thicker tissue? Because as it's developing, if the tissue is thicker and the tooth is emerging its way through, the tissue is actually stripping the tooth in that young stage of some of the topography on it. With some of the thinner biotypes, 2 and 1, the tissue doesn't have as much pressure. So as the tooth kind of evulses out, it's not getting that smoother surface, and you're seeing a little bit more of the topography. The second component to this is age. As we age, we lose 2 to 3 microns of enamel per year, especially in the posterior teeth. And with all the harshness of the chemicals and materials that we use today, soda and iced teas, which are very high in pH, and toothbrushing with bleach components in them, right? Everybody's got bleaching toothpaste today and bleaching. So we're kind of much more aggressive to the surface of the tooth. And then the third part to what Aki talked about is the pits and irregularities. And sometimes you'll just see me with a burr just kind of tapping away at a tooth to kind of create some of these little pits and irregularities. I'm not really following any scheme except to mess up the surface a little bit. And then the last part of this will be the pericomato. And the pericomato, I think, is one of the most interesting ones, because if you look to the right of your screen, you should notice that there's I teach this one a lot because it's a really simple system. See, if I just make like a little bit of a U shape here at the top of the incisal edge, which, by the way, is usually in reference to the zenith of the tooth. If I just kind of make that little U or C shape, and then every step after that, I follow it. I follow it that way, I follow it that way, I follow it that way, and you really start to create what nature would have done in the pericomato of the tooth. Now, would I leave it that way? Maybe, maybe not. It really depends on the age of the tooth. I might rubber wheel some of it away. I might lose some of it in the glazing process, which we'll also touch on. And if you don't have this chart, I suggest you kind of take a picture of this. You'll see type 1A is high texture and high luster. What does that mean? Easy. Type B, high texture, medium luster, still not so difficult. And then high texture and low luster, all controlled in the polishing at the end. Here's where they start getting more difficult. Type 2A, moderate texture, high luster, kind of works. Moderate texture medium, and moderate texture with low, much more difficult, because I don't want to lose that texture as I'm polishing away to lower the luster of my restoration, or as I'm polishing up to raise the luster. The ones that I feel are the most difficult are the type 3 teeth, so 3A, B, and C. And these are low texture teeth that either have a very high luster or a very low luster. The high one is not so difficult because like it's easy to polish up a low luster tooth. But when there is low texture, getting that low luster and maintaining the texturability or the lack of texture, I find to be one of the more difficult ones. So it's nice to kind of classify these. years ago, I think I was actually trying to put more of this into my scripts and have the doctors pick, and it never really worked out as well. So I think I got away from it over the years, but I still use it when I'm thinking through the tooth, especially when I'm trying to match the teeth that I'm working through. Okay, so let's look at some surface topography. This is funny because this was a case I did so long ago, and I happened to find the models, and I grabbed them and just took a picture of them, and I'm like, wow, what's really interesting is even in my wax up, I really have the details that I see on the stone model. And what do I mean by that? You can kind of see in stone, obviously light doesn't reflect as well on stone, but you can kind of see that the light on my wax up has a very similar reflectance to the light on the stone model. And that's really critical for us when we're looking at the shape. So when I'm looking at something as deep as these, as deep or intense as this is, I'm looking at all the things that we just went through. What are the ridges and grooves? What are the horizontal? Where is the pits and fissures that are in there? And is there a pericomotor or not? And as I look through those things, I'm trying to compare them to different models. And I mentioned to you that where some of the challenges come in for us is kind of in this new modern world. Again, I'm not anti-digital. I just want you to notice the difference between a digital cast that I see here and a poured cast. And you should be able to tell right away, look at the little horizontal ridges and grooves that happen here on these teeth, and look at what happens here. I don't see any of those. I don't see them because they don't really exist in digital cast. A digital surface texture are all those little fake pericomatas that are formed during the printing of the cast or the milling of the cast today. So for me, I'm not a fan of digital when it comes to really nailing certain things. Does that mean that I don't use digital models? Of course not. We use lots of. I have 3 printers, right? And we're always kind of printing, and a lot of my doctors have printers today. But in the end, what I want to be clear about, you can't really see surface topography in a digital cast. So let's just accept that and understand that there might be times when we shouldn't be doing digital, right? And what do I mean by that? Perfect example. For me, I have a basic protocol in the lab that we try to follow. So one, single central cannot be in a digital cast. Why? Because there is no surface topography for me to see, and I will never be able to match that single central close to what I want it to be without seeing that topography. Can I see it in certain photos? Yes. Can I translate it to the cast and get the same reflective index? Almost impossible to do for me at this stage. Maybe years from now, I'll have a different opinion on it. Two, veneers. I don't really like doing veneers on digital models. Now, have I done them? Yes, of course I have. I've done them with Mark II materials, and I've done them with lithium disilicate, layered and micro layered. But in the end, if I'm doing 1 tooth or 2 teeth or 4 teeth, I call it the 2-4 aesthetic kind of a version. I really need to see the topography on the lower teeth and the adjacent teeth in order for this to make it work. So I try to avoid it for single centrals, veneer cases, and the 2 or 4 kind of cases. Also for younger people, right? If the people have a lot of surface topography and it's a younger tooth, take an impression. Just get away from the concept, or at least a study model impression. So I can see the adjacent tooth that will really help me add into what I'm trying to capture in the technology. So when I go back to this case, I'm going to actually, I built a crown on this, and you can actually see that it looks, I don't want to say amateur, but I guess it does, right? I did this maybe, 10, 12 years ago when I was documenting these things. And I'd say, yeah, maybe I didn't really draw it out as well as I could have, but it was a little naive back then with it. But I think you get the point, right? What am I looking at? All the ridges, I'm looking at the heights, I'm looking at the grooves, I'm looking at the horizontal, I'm looking at the concavities and convexities, and I'm trying to map them all out so that when I come to my restoration, I can start to add some of them back in. And at this point, I really only use 3 or 4 different burs. Today, I'm a little more back and forth. I probably have about a dozen different ones that I'm using, and maybe always experimenting. Sometimes I try one and I think I love it, and then a month later, I'm like, I don't really like that one, right? It's kind of a constant evolution of trying to figure out which ones give you the most of what you need. And I can tell you I've changed a dozen times from what you see here to what I'm using today. I've really kind of changed it, and I'll probably change it again a month from now. And by the way, it's even more complicated when I get into monolithic materials, and we're trying to work in the green state, trying to find the right materials or the right burrs, and maybe even knives or dull burrs or things that I could use to give me the right angulation of a cut into either a natural restoration or into a monolithic restoration, which becomes really challenging for us. Part of the reason for that actually comes from a great book from Katioka. And Katioka talked a lot about understanding not only the surface, but understanding angulation. So what I mean by that is if I take something that has a flat top to it and a surface kind of an L looking, well, the angle that I hold that on as I'm kind of digging into my tooth creates one thing. If I change that angle, it creates something different. And the more I change that angle, the more I'm able to change. So even with a normal burr, just the ability to sometimes change the angulation of how you're working through it really changes the effect of what the restoration is going to look like. And at the end, to make those work, I usually check with a gold or silver powder to kind of make it work. And again, on the model, you should notice that the light reflection is pretty similar, right? The ridges, the grooves, the highs and lows. I'm trying to make all those things kind of fall into place and work similar to what I saw in nature. So I think I can kind of walk through these. Let me see. So I made a few little quick videos of trying to create some surface texture and topography. And I think, you know, it's kind of difficult, right? I think this is one of those things that's kind of a sit down close up with people and really work through it. But I did it basically just to give you the understanding that it's never exactly one thing, right? Sometimes I'm using a flatter edge burr and kind of just working my way through the whole tooth. Sometimes I'm kind of picking and choosing little areas that I want to roughen up. And each of those are kind of critical in order for me to kind of get to where I want to go. So let's go to the next group here. I think I could play these. Let's see. Yeah, I'll play them both at the same time just to save some time. But now you see I've changed one of the burrs on the left of the screen. I'm using much more of a point and kind of getting into some of those grooves and ridges. And on the right side of the screen, you see I'm using more of a pear-shaped kind of burr. And I'm kind of roughing through the surface and maybe taking away some of the ridges and grooves that I put in and maybe adding some new ones, right? So I think that's the beauty of really having the differentials between making it look real is sometimes you have to put more in and take it away, either in the rubber wheel or the polish to make it work. Let me play these quick. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. So I'll play them all at the same time so you can kind of just jump. The one to the left screen, I'm showing you that I kind of put it into my finger. And I always show that because I want to say that when I'm working on surface topography, I'm not really grinding the tooth. What I'm really doing is just kind of playfully or very lightly creating these little ridges and grooves and depth. And I think there's kind of a feel that you have to create for that to make that work. And again, notice the hand angulations of how we're changing from one angle to another, where the burr angle is coming in to the restoration becomes critical for us. And I can't begin to tell you that this is so much more challenging for us in monolithic materials. Putting the surface topography into a monolithic at the end is silly and virtually impossible, and you just ruin your burrs and you're sitting there getting little scratchies in there. Learning to do it in the green state is really where it is. And I'm not going to pretend I'm great at that. I'm kind of working on it a lot the last few months and trying to come up with some systems to really be able to incorporate this better for us, because let's be honest, we're doing a lot more monolithic things today. So I actually have a big full arch Zurich bridge on my desk that I was just playing with before I jumped in here. And I'm trying to figure out, and I think why it's difficult for me to teach is because when I grind on a natural tooth or I machine a natural tooth to create something, what I put in there is what I get. When I do that on monolithic materials, what I put in there is minus 20%, right? So it's kind of like I have to compensate for how deep it should be, how wide it should be, how far it should go, because I won't have the ability to come back and fix it later on. I have to kind of get it right the first time. So I'm working on that now and trying to develop a system for that with monolithic materials where we can get the right amount of surface topography and yet still keep them in that monolithic world. I gotta be honest, it's a challenge. It's not really easy. There's a few people I think are pretty good at it today, but I know I'm trying to really develop it myself and try to figure out the right ways that I can not only do it repetitively, but share it with everybody. So in the end, I think it can be done. I just think it's a little bit more challenging than we realize sometimes to be able to create all those ins and outs in the monolithic world. Let's not forget that shape plays a major role. And you'll notice that as I'm working through my cases, I'm checking myself all the time. Red lines are my heights of contour, blue lines are my interproximal spaces, and I'm trying to make sure that they always kind of fall into the same ballpark as I'm working my way through them. Another great exercise that I've taught a lot over the years, especially in hands-on courses, is sometimes when you find teeth you like, duplicate the model and make the teeth removable so I can actually take them out and have sets of teeth. And I could set them up on Play-Doh, or I could set them up on a way where I can actually look at them and see what they look like when I just put them next to each other. Or what if I overlap or change the angulations a little bit and see how much different the light reflection looks based on one tooth position being different, but also how much more or less embrasure space I may have depending on the angulation of the root or how I put those in. So I'm always kind of thinking of those and trying to figure out ways to make those work. If the teeth are tilted towards the distal, well, that my mesial line angle embrasures should be much deeper and wider. If my distals of the centrals are out much further, well, then those mesial embrasures will be a lot more closed off, and those line angles will be closer together. And when we overlap, it's a whole different ball game, right? Because I always laugh and say that the Europeans were so much better with overlaps than I think we as Americans were, because they did so many more of them. And we have a tendency to not think of the lingual morphology or the lingual form. So when we're trying to overlap a tooth, we just kind of move it out there and put it over. But it doesn't really work that way, right? In order for a tooth to overlap, it's all about the lingual morphology and making sure that the lingual contour is proper. Otherwise, it'll never look right when it lays over or sticks out or protrudes out a little bit from the adjacent tooth. The other real point that I think is kind of critical here is this. There are two big aspects here. We call these the optical volumes and the real volume. So we use our red pencil as our best friend. We use the line of the red pencil, not the point, but the flat of the pencil to highlight those line angles. Never draw on them. And the reason we want to do that is because those heights of contour, or those ridges that we just discussed, show you what we call the optical volume of the tooth. And the optical volume of the tooth is nothing more than the line angle to line angle and the space in between that tooth. So kind of, let me go here. So the space in between this tooth that we have here. The real volume of the tooth is the whole entire border of the tooth. And that's what the space that the tooth fills. And this is what the light reflects from most of the time. And it's really the best way to think of it. So the optical width is where the greatest amount of light reflection comes from. And the real width is just the amount of space the tooth provides for us. This is also important from the emergence profile. I always kind of critique people that I feel like when I see them make pontics or emergence, or they're trying to emerge an implant, that they're not really understanding that teeth have really different shapes to them, right? This is a root, a cutoff to the root of a central. And look at this shape to it. It's kind of, more in the square world, but it has these severe angles. And by the way, this area here and this area here would be where the line angles are. So this would be the optical reflecting area. When I get to the lateral, look how much difference the emergence is. And that means that the line angles are going to come out much differently here. And I'm going to have a much smaller optical area. And the cuspid, the same thing. The cuspid, the line angle is going to be here and here. But look at how much narrower the width of that root is from mesial to distal. So the tooth gets a lot wider as it comes up out of the arch. And we have to really think through that as we're working through our teeth. And I've used this example before. A lateral with a worn incisal edge. Here's that same lateral cut off 2 millimeters down, and here's that same lateral cut off to the root. Look at how much different that form and that contour is that we have to kind of work our way through. So even when we think we got it, a lot of times we don't, right? I remember working on this case years ago, and I just quickly put my blue lines on. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm pretty close. And then I'm like, well, wait a second. This looks a little off. And then when I fill in my red lines to see where that emergence is in the real volume, I can see how much different that is. So I got to kind of come back and correct that. And I'm either going to have to take away more here, or maybe add something back here to get these to look the same, because those are the areas that I care about the most. What I really care about the most is those mesial line angles here and here. I don't care so much about this, and I don't care so much about that, because as we go to the right and left sides of the face, the teeth aren't exactly the same. But what do I care about the most is that. I want to make sure my mesial line angles really highlight the same way. And this is probably the best example of this. Look at the line angles here. Look at the light reflection. Surface topography, lots of it, not exactly the same, but similar. Light reflection, light reflection, light reflection, light reflection, right? So I'm looking at all these details: line angles, shade, contour, surface, and light reflection. And look at those mesial line angles. Look how similar they are to make that work, a very round looking tooth, right? So in order for that to work, the only way it works is to match those line angles. Are the distals exactly the same? No, this one protrudes out more. This one's angle is a little sharper, not as bulbous here, a little more on the cervical third. They don't have to be the same. Those mesial line angles really have to be the same. And you should be able to look at your cast and start to read through this. What do I mean by that? If I'm looking at these two teeth and I'm going to make restorations on them, well, I can see that this tooth, my line angle is going to be here, and this tooth, my line angle is going to be here. But this one's going to be a challenge. Why? The tooth had an overlap. How do I know? I can tell by the angulation of this root. Look where it kind of comes out to. So unless I'm going to put the overlap back on this tooth, I'm going to have to move my line angle. I'm going to have to take that line angle and try to move it into a different position in order for me to make that work and make it look symmetrical to the other tooth. And in truth, we should make that line angle, and the doctor should do a root plasty here and actually flatten that area out a little bit so we can get the same emergence on the restorations. So the emergence is always key. This is a great trick before we finished up. For those of you who don't know it, this came from Weiss and McLaren years ago, and I still use it a lot. It's a great little trick that if you're looking at a cast of your model, you take the zenith of your central and you draw a dot from the zenith up 10 to 12 millimeters. On the lateral, it's 5 to 7 millimeters, and on the cusp, it's 3 to 5 millimeters. And if you draw that dot and then just draw two lines straight up to fill the space, you'll almost always have the approximate line angulation of the tooth. Can you shift them in or out a little bit to widen or narrow the look of the tooth? Of course you can. But from a basics point of view, to have this as a little form to kind of work with as you're working through the teeth is kind of a nice way to do that, okay? Also, another mistake we make with the surface texture and the topography is realize that the contact areas play a role in that because they create the embrasure spaces. So even though we're kind of focused here, if we don't roll this in the right way and create the right emergence and the right embrasure, it never really looks right. So contacts are areas, they're not dots. Make sure you make your contacts correct. And then lastly, when you're working on your contour form and texture, remember that we're working in 3 different planes, okay? That cervical plane, that middle third, and that incisal edge. And this is a great example to always talk to your doctors about prepping in planes. Because a lot of times the doctors are great at reducing right here and a little bit right here, and then they completely forget about this. I can't tell you how many preps I've seen lately with some new doctors that I'm working with where they're reducing a ton of space or a ton of reduction on the lingual, and then when I get to the facial, there's nothing left because they over reduced here and didn't follow the 3 planes on the facial. So really important. And those 3 planes are also 3 zones of color: the most chroma in the cervical, the most value in the middle third, and the translucency in that incisal edge. And those zones should tie together with our surface topography, but they are 3 different reflective zones, and you have to think of them that way. Last point I make before I finish up with the case is back to the digital world. Another issue that we developed in the digital world is this. We're trying to put our surface topography in the monolithic lithium disilicate or in the zirconia materials, and it's really hard to do, right? So I ground on these afterward just to show you. Really hard to get these to look smooth and free. The other problem is the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use a glazing paste on these. So because we're using glazing paste, because there's no fluorescence in the restoration, well, the glazing paste have a thickness to them. And when you apply that glazing paste on, here it is before, and here it is with glazing paste over half the tooth. And you notice how that topography that kind of looked horrible here doesn't look so bad here anymore, right? Because the glazing paste is actually filling in some of those areas. So again, another way to think it through, this is where the challenge are coming in more in the monolithic world, is how much depth and topography do we want, and how much of it will we lose when we go over this with a glazing paste in the monolithic world. It's not an easy system. It's a little more challenging. I can tell you one of the things I do with the glazing paste is make sure you use them properly viscosity wise, but also sometimes with the glazing paste, I will actually modify them. And what I mean by modifying them is maybe I'm going to use a finishing agent in them to thin them out a little bit, because I don't want them to just wash away all my surface topography that I put on the tooth. So the finishing agent works nice. I still have high fluorescence with the glazing materials, but they can cut down that thickness or that viscosity of the glazing material. So whatever surface topography I put in, I can kind of repeat, and I'll get a much better kind of a look to the surface rather than having that bulky, I should say, look to my.
Good.
I'm not sure what the box is. Now, when I'm done, I'm going to use some over the wheel. I have to polish away a little bit of that glazing, and then I'll kind of come back and finalize that in the end. So I'll leave you with one case because I think we're pretty close. Oh, I'm almost running late here, so let me run through this case quick. And nothing important with this case in the details except for the patient wanted the teeth longer. We went through a process to check how much longer we should make them. Doctor added a little composite in the mouth. We did all the normal evaluations, facial, where we want the teeth, all the same stuff that we would do. Preparations are done, provisionals are made. You can see a little bit of a lot longer tooth, and you can see provisionals came nice, that we'll get some papilla developed back in here as we're doing that. I did my normal buildup, right? Dentins and mamelon materials and all the things that I would normally do. And the reason I actually put this case in was because in the end, she wanted super white and bright. And the only way I could really compensate for the length and the super white and bright was really in the surface, right? I had to really kind of make a little bit more of a surface area on these teeth to kind of make them flow a little bit. And again, notice the light reflection, right? Line angle, distal, see the middle third of the central, middle third of the laterals, both of them are the same. Peaks on the cuspid, see where the light reflects and the light reflects. So all of those little details, even though they're super white and bright and not tons of translucency, kind of what make those work, those little details of light reflection there across the board. Okay, I'm going to stop here because we got about 5 minutes left. And if we have any questions, I can kind of run through them. Jim, thank you again. I'll remind everybody that I think the next webinar is by myself, and then the one after that, I'll have a guest doctor with me, and we'll kind of run through our case and our philosophy, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. So thank you guys for being here today, and if you have some questions, feel free. And Jim, I'll give you back the screen.
All right, your next webinar is April 11th. So those of you that are interested, we do have some questions, so let's go through them.
The 11th is by myself, and then if I'm not mistaken, the 30th is with a clinical partner, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so the 30th is by myself. I'm not sure what the topic is. And then on the 30th of April, I'll be with one of my doctors.
All right. So let me pull this back a little bit here. And all right, those of you that were asking about CE, you'll get a CE letter or information when we completely process everything from this webinar. We'll use your registration information from the webinar and get you that information. Reminder, this has been recorded, and you can visit in a couple days, revisit the webinar on the VITA North America YouTube channel. We do have sources that you can contact, your local rep here at the help desk as well. If you have any follow-up questions or need to contact Peter, of course, he's gracious enough to give us his information. we have several webinars going on and so forth. So the April 11th, Peter, that's anterior ceramics. And then April 30th is the clinical lab teamwork webinar.
Great.
And then if anyone does full arch restorations or dentures, we do have a couple of workshops scheduled in Germany. It's a 1 week long, how to set up dentures. And then on the downtime, which is pretty much most of the week, you'll be entertained going to either go beer tasting or wine tasting or into the Black Mountains in the forest and visiting all around there. So it's a very nice destination course. If you're interested, please get a hold of us. This, of course, is Peter's information. Let's look at some questions here. We have one that on zirconia monolithic. Peter, how do you create your texture on zirconia? Do you do something before you center it, or do you do it after it's centered?
I'm trying to do it all pre-center, right? I'm trying to do it all in green state. I'm not perfect at it by any means yet. I'm still working on it, to be honest with you. There's probably a few people who are better at it than I am at this point, but it's a challenge, right? Because you got a 20-degree shrinkage factor, and because you're working in what feels like chalk, it's very difficult to create smoother surfaces, right? It's kind of like either a sharp angle or no angle. So I'm really just using very slow speeds, different burrs, playing with different, even using like a bar Parker knife here and there, and really just trying to develop as much as I can. I'd rather have too much in the monolithic world, and this way when I come down to the final restoration that's centered, I can go in with a blue or red or a pink rubber wheel and take some of it out and try to roll those little sharp edges. But I'm really trying to work it through to be perfect in green first, and that's just kind of an endless challenge right now.
All right. And then you showed a picture there that showed the paste. The question was, if you add your glaze or your mix onto your texture and you have too much glaze, do you just start over, recorrect it, retexture it, and then use a light thickness of glaze at that point, or make deeper?
Yeah, no, at that point, so I get what you're saying. I try not to use too much glaze, and that's why I showed you by breaking the glaze down, right? Using a finishing agent in it or breaking it down a little when you're really trying to show surface texture. But if I messed up and I put too much glaze on and I glazed it, I would probably come back and re-add some of the surface topography back, and then either re-glaze it at a lower temperature or just polish it, right? I would really break in there with some diamond paste and some, pumice polish if I needed. And actually, I have a system where I have a few different polishes that from the dialite system where one's a little more coarse and one's a little more fine. So you can kind of get in there and just polish everything up rather than have to refire it again.
All right, that kind of leads into another question. What materials or rubber wheels do you use? And you just mentioned some dialite wheels. Anything else on that?
Yeah, I'm using the dialite polishes. There's three of them. There's like a yellow one's kind of my favorite. There's a blue and a red and a green, I think, and each of them have a different amount of coarseness to them. I probably tend to finish the most with the yellowish that I'm using most of the time, but I do change that up every now and then. If I want a lower luster or a higher luster, the finer the polish, the higher the luster. The rougher the polish, the lower the luster.
All right. And then another question, do you always use Yellowstone? The models that you said, print doesn't really show the texture of the natural teeth, but do you always use Yellowstone, or does it matter?
No, I mean, we've switched stones a lot over the years. I think some of those photos that you guys probably saw today was the old GC stone. We don't really use that one anymore when they changed formula. We do use our stones not necessarily just for color. Obviously, the color is useful. We're kind of using an off yellowish taupey kind of color now. But really, my main concern for stones is the expansion factor, right? So we're really kind of concerned with the most is that we have a stone that expands about 0.09, which is the average shrinkage of impression materials, and then mixed and measured and weighed well. But in almost any cast, if it's poured properly, meaning that you don't over-debubblize and you flow the stone through the right way, you're going to capture and see the surface texture, whether the stone itself is white, yellow, blue, or gray. You'll still see those details.
All right. And then one last question is at the bench, when you assess your reflection, your line angles, do you just visually do that? Do you use a special light, or do you use a camera and then take a photo and look at it through a photo?
Yeah, so that's actually what I do at the end. I'll either draw my line angles on, with the flat of the pencil, or I won't, and then I'll just take a quick picture of it, put it on my screen, and look at it and see if I'm getting that light reflection the way I want. I think that's really where I see it the best, to be honest with you, because let's be honest, it's harder and harder to see things as the older we get. And looking at a tooth on the model that's this big, or looking at it on my screen that's this big, I see a lot more detail-y things that are kind of nice for us.
Sure. Well, Peter, again, I think it's a very great subject matter. We get lots of calls on it. I'm sure you get questions about texture and topography and hey, how can I achieve what you show in your clinical photos. So I want to thank you for spending the time with all the customers, everyone that's interested in learning and advancing. So thank you very much, Peter, for your time. Any last closeout statements?
No, I'm looking forward to the 30th with a partner. I think that's going to be a lot of fun to kind of change the format a little bit. And I guess I'll see some of you guys in California, I guess, in May, and around in Oregon or something I think I'm going to be. So I look forward to seeing everybody up close and personal. And if not, please join us for the next webinar. Come on down again.
All right. Well, thank you very much again. And thank you, everyone that joined us today. It's been great information. Peter always delivers some excellent information that we can actually use on the bench. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on another VITA Academy webinar. This will conclude today's webinar. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Hello.